Which prospects should you be stashing? Find out next on Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. Welcome into FBT in 5. Today is Saturday, April 8th. I am Frank Samfeld, joined by Scott White, and let's talk top prospects. 5 on the verge. These are the ones that you need to be stashing. Francisco Alvarez, well, if you're listening to this on Saturday, then he's already up with the New York Mets. Sal Frelick with the Brewers. Brett Baty also with the Mets. Brandon Pfaadt with the Diamondbacks. And Edouard Julien with the Twins. What do we have on these, Scott?
Well, I guess we should get into Alvarez, even though the time to stash him is probably over coming up for the Mets because Omar Narvaez is out for the next 1/3 of the season, basically, with a calf injury. And because it's such a long absence, Alvarez is going to have to play. They're not going to call him up for that length of time just to waste away on the bench, just to be an emergency starter behind the plate. His offense is known to be well ahead of his defense, and so maybe most of his playing time will come at DH. But, they're probably not going to want to hinder his development too much behind the plate. So maybe half the time behind the plate, maybe half the time at DH, occasionally on the bench. But enough at bats that Francisco Alvarez is going to be a worthy fantasy option, particularly in CBS Sports Leagues where he's already catcher eligible. And on some other platforms, he'll have to regain it. He'll be DH only to start out. Sal Frelick, we've recently found out Joey Wiemer is ahead of him in the pecking order. After finding out late last year, Garrett Mitchell is ahead of him in the pecking order. I'm in on both Mitchell and Wiemer, but I'm still surprised by both those decisions because Frelick seems like a finished product and a can't-miss prospect. Plus contact skills, plenty of base stealing potential. It's going to happen sooner or later, and I think he'll be a useful fantasy option right away. Frelick, particularly in those 5 outfielder leagues. Brett Baty is off to a hot start at AAA. He did recently leave with a thumb injury, and in the same thumb where he had season-ending surgery last year, actually, but it was ruled to be just inflammation. He's day-to-day, should be fine. Eduardo Escobar off to a slow start at the major league level, and clearly not a long-term option for the Mets. So hopefully Brett Baty can bust open that door sooner than later. Pfaadt was knocked around in his first start at AAA Reno in the Diamondbacks system. Really tough place to pitch. Last year, Ryan Nelson had an ERA over 5 there. Drey Jameson had an ERA over 6 there. So I don't know that we should assess Pfaadt so much on performance. For what it's worth, last year, once he got to AAA Reno, he had a 2.64 ERA. So he blew Nelson and Jameson away. Also had a good spring, did Brandon Pfaadt. So I would presume he's the next one up should an opening emerge on the Diamondbacks rotation. And considering Zach Davies is in that rotation, it'll probably happen sooner than later. And Edouard Julien, who you mentioned, between spring training and the World Baseball Classic, Edouard Julien hit .417 with 5 home runs. So he showed he's like ready to go against advanced competition after reaching base at like a .440 clip the last 2 years in the minors. That's the thing he does best. Not a great defender at second base, but right now the Twins are having to make do with Nick Gordon there. Jorge Polanco apparently just started a rehab assignment, so maybe he'll be back before we get a chance to see Julien. But at some point, I think Julian's bat's going to force the issue. Maybe not at Polanco's expense, but at somebody else's expense.
All right, the 5 prospects that are on the periphery. These are names that are doing something of note as of late and names that you probably should know. Tyler Soderstrom with the A's, Matthew Liberatore with the Cardinals, Parker Meadows with the Tigers, Addison Barger with the Blue Jays, and Nolan Jones with the Rockies. Scott, is there 1 or 2 names here that you'd like to highlight from that group?
Yeah, so Matthew Liberatore, you may remember he came up for the Cardinals last year, looked awful, had an ERA near 6. But he was a top prospect for several years leading up to that, basically from the time he was 19. He's still 23 now, so it's not too late for Liberatore to figure it out. And his velocity was up this spring. He had a really impressive start, his final spring start, and his first start at AAA was great too. 5 innings, no earned runs, 7 strikeouts. Cardinals pitching staff has been getting knocked around so far. And Liberatore might be able to help, and might be a better help than we expected if he continues to go down this path. And Parker Meadows, Austin Meadows' brother, actually, another outfielder in the Tigers organization. From June 4th on last year, he broke out, cut down on his strikeouts at 305 with a 902 OPS. And then this spring, he was clearly the better of the Meadows brothers, hitting 5 home runs. Great defender in center field, too. He has totally flown under the radar in prospect rankings, has Parker Meadows. But there appears to be plenty of power there, some speed. Again, like I said, he's a good defender. So if he stays hot at AAA, he's somebody who could turn into a pretty good dynasty asset.
All right. For more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the Audacy app, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, and we'll be back again next week. Bye-bye.